Hi, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek podcast for Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you on board. I hope you've had a great week. I'm recording a second podcast this week, so I'm trying to put a little bit out into the kitty because I have some travel coming up. I'm still sort of recovering from the 10 days that I was away. Boy, it really does interrupt your life, to be sure. So I am trying to dig out of that, and I'm starting to breathe, but I also have to prepare for some upcoming trainings that I have to give this fall, and then of course early next year. So the pressure's on, as you say. So I'm sure many of you, of course, are out busy with the summertime, although sometimes things kind of slow down just a little bit in the dog days of summer. So hopefully, if that's the case for you, I hope you are able to enjoy a little bit of time with your family before things begin to cool off here in the fall. So if you're wondering what Living the Wildlife is all about, well, it's basically pretty simple. Living the Wildlife is where we focus on research-based information to help professionals and newbies alike to responsibly resolve conflicts with vertebrate pests. So anything related to wildlife control, vertebrate pest control, we deal with that here in Living the Wildlife. Perhaps you have a topic that you'd like to have discussed, you can certainly send that along to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. If thoughts, criticisms, we do hope you would take a few moments and subscribe to the channel. We've got years of material already out there, both on YouTube and on Rumble. If you want to find me on Rumble, just look under Wildlife Control Consultant. I tried looking it up under Living the Wildlife, and their algorithm, it didn't show up, even though I put it in the description on all of my podcasts. So Rumble's got a little bit of work to do, but they're still new to the ball game. So anyways, we're glad to have you on board, and we do hope you would subscribe to the channel. If you have suggestions for new shows, definitely reach out. Otherwise, as I say, I'm going to talk about things that interest me. Well, this week, I wanted to talk about resources that are going to be available. One of the things that absolutely drives me bonkers is when I'm looking on Facebook, or I'm looking on various sites, and people will say, I need to know about this. And I'm like, really? You don't know where to find quality information? So let me kind of clear it up for you all here. You need to be sure that you have resources available to you so that you can do some of this work on your own without having to. Everyone thinks that Facebook is going to solve all their problems. It can be a very powerful tool, to be sure, but you also have to ask the question: is how vetted is that information, right? So, because one of the things that I learned too late in my work online was that sometimes, not always, sometimes the people that spend an inordinate amount of time on Facebook and the internet and communicating, the reason they can do that is because they're not busy. So you want to kind of keep that in the back. It doesn't mean they're not good, not suggesting that, although it could. But sometimes they're like spending a lot of time online because they're just not that busy. So you're going to need to make sure you dig your own well and find resources. So I wanted to kind of point out a location where you can find information. It doesn't cost you directly anything. I don't call it free. It's just been paid for by someone else, or if you're in the state of Montana, it's been paid for by people in Montana. So because this is a government website, and so it really irritates me. Again, I'm really talking about my irritations today, but it does irritate me when people think that the government does stuff for free. Let me just kind of lay it out for you. Anyone who tells you that the government's doing something for free is lying to you. Okay? And if you don't know that, that is a problem. Okay? So there is a huge problem in our country. We think that when the government does something, it's somehow magical or it's free. Let me assure you, it's not free. Okay, and I'll be enough of my political announcement here. But this is a particular website here. If you go to the Montana Department of Agriculture website, and maybe I can blow this up a little bit more for you so you can view it. No, actually I can't. So let me go back down. So if you go to the agr.mt.gov/V vertebrate -P pests, it'll come up for you. But you can basically just go to the Montana Department of Ag website, just look up the phrase vertebrate pests, and that'll bring you here to this particular page. Scroll down a little bit, and then you'll see a picture of the skunk. Click this. This is a listing of the Montana Vertebrate Pest Bulletins. Now, these have been kept up to date fairly well. Now, obviously, it's going to be Montana focused, so it's really for those of you who are living in the West, for example, are going to find this a lot more valuable than those of you in the East. However, before you tune out, there's still a lot of information in here that's going to be helpful, because we have species in Montana that are that go beyond just Montana, right? So things like prairie dogs, and talks about skunks, and talks about bats. So it talks about mice, and talks about voles, and a lot of the information and material there can be applicable to a variety of states. So there are other resources, and I will probably from time to time come back online here and highlight those. If some of you have been with me for a while, you know that I've also talked about the wildlife damage series that's done by USDA Wildlife Services. I have several documents published in that series. That is also an important resource, has a lot of information on birds. So I have talked about other resources available. Again, there is no additional charge for that particular information either. But in this case, we're just going to focus on this one site. And if you're wondering how I know it so well, I'm the author of it. So let me be clear here. I got to put the caveat. I'm not on government time here. I am doing this completely on my own. I'm simply highlighting my own work, but it's work that I did as in my role on the state. So my podcast is not endorsed by the Montana Department of Ag website. I am simply putting forth my material out there, material that I also adapted from my predecessors for your use. It doesn't cost you anything additional to use this material. All right, so I hope I got that caveat out there. So love it, hate it, you haven't lost any money per se, except for the cost of your download time. So you click this particular link, and this brings you to the publications page, right? The Montana Vertebrate Pest Bulletins. And you can see there's a fair number of publications here. Here they're organized by animal group, right? Not by species, but by animal group. So there's a publication here on bats. There's also a few publications on birds, particularly starlings and woodpecker damage to buildings. So those are two bird species that are pretty important, pretty common problems here in Montana. I don't know if I'll be putting out another document, perhaps maybe on pigeons or something. We have pigeon issues here in Montana, but nothing like you would have outside of the state in a lot of your heavily more urbanized areas. So in any event, something for you to think about. We do have a publication on skunks, so let's kind of pull up this one on skunk management, right? Just to kind of give you a look of it. So you can see here there's going to be a date, a revised date here at the bottom. So let me kind of blow that up. So we're going to come here and look, and there's going to be a date here. So you can see that this was reviewed or revised in June of 2023, so last year. So it's pretty up to date, all things considered. So I do from time to time when something new comes along, try to update it. For example, I need to update the pocket gopher publication because of a new trap that I have gained just a modicum of experience with, but I had a great encounter with a producer who's really kind of he converted me. That's all I can say about that. So I do need to update that pocket gopher one. But nevertheless, it's going to be some good information there. So basically the structure of all of these documents is essentially the same. I go through some basic biology, right? What you can probably skip through. A lot of you aren't necessarily interested in the biology. Then I talk about identifying of the damage. And here we have a whole section in terms of how to deodorize skunk odor, talking about the myths involved with that, and then what actually does work. And then I talk about how to identify their particular damage to turf, and then I get into control methods. Always try to be as comprehensive in the control methods with a criterion of the following. Something that has to be legal. Okay, I mean, kind of, that's kind of important. Because a lot of things can work, but they're illegal, right? So this is something you always have to keep in the back of your mind. And then secondly, it needs to be somewhat practical. And that is, you may have some more arcane things that will work, but they're just not necessarily practical for someone. And then the third criteria would be, do I want a non-professional, because this is written for non-professionals. Professionals can still glean positive information from it, especially if you're new to the industry. I would certainly encourage this. It's a very inexpensive way for you to kind of get things started in your own work, to check yourself. But it is, if something is, I think, a little bit too potentially dangerous for a newcomer, then I often won't necessarily mention that, or I will maybe mention in passing and tell them that they need to maybe get professional help, right? So that is kind of how I work through these publications, but they can get somewhat technical, particularly in the area if there are pesticides involved, because again, this is part of the Montana Department of Ag program, and of course that agency regulates the use of pesticides within the state of Montana. So pesticide use would be something very important, of course, to that agency. And if you are someone who is licensed to use pesticides in your particular state, then you may find some of the information here helpful as well in terms of the best uses and application of that pesticide. Sometimes I'm able to go beyond the label, not contradicting the label, want to be clear about that, but about some of the things that help enhance the effectiveness of baits in terms of the application, and often maybe give you the rationale for why the label is written the way it is. Okay, that may not always be obvious to you. So here we talk about some exclusion methods, about how to do a test for whether skunks are still living there, and then talk about various cage and box traps that can be used and how to use them in a humane manner. Those of you that have followed my podcast know that I don't believe that cage and box traps are automatically humane, and so I've certainly written that here in this particular publication. And then talk about some ways to set things up, and then I talk about how to dispose of the animal, both by translocation and lethal control. Again, your state may have different requirements on that. For example, in some states, it is illegal to release a rabies vector species, of which skunks would typically be categorized as. So always make sure you read this document and filter it on the legal side through your particular state laws. But in terms of the nuts and bolts of how to do something, these publications can be useful for you. All right, so enough about that. And then let's get into some of the other bulletins. So those of you dealing with prairie dogs, for example, so we have a lot of rodents here in Montana. So let's go to prairie dog management. And here's the publication on prairie dog management. And again, you will see at the bottom, there's a date of when it was published or when it was revised, because these will be constantly being revised as new information comes in. So the way to keep track is to just look and say, okay, what's the date? So you may see another one. And sometimes it's just a sentence. It could just be a sentence that changed, right? Because especially now with the EPA telling us that they're making new changes with rodenticides, I would anticipate in a year or so, there may be all of these publications may have to go through some level of change, particularly the ones dealing obviously with rodenticides. So talking about the biology again, their legal status, and then they get down into types of control methods, right? You know, the habitat modification, raptor perches, shooting, trapping. Yeah, even people do trap prairie dogs, fumigants, and then the different types of fumigants that are used, identification of active burrows, and then of course there's a lot of information here on the use of the various pesticides, because it's hard to trap a lot of prairie dogs because the acreage is just too big. And so pesticides are really the way to handle it. So there's a lot of detail here in terms of using pesticides in the most effective and, of course, legally, but also using them in the best effective way. So a lot of explanation given there. So in this one, that publication's fairly long. It's 10 pages, so it's got a lot of material there. Well, let's hit another one. I also have some technical information for those of you that that like to use aluminum phosphide. Of course, those of you that have pesticide licenses, if you've been keeping up a little bit with what's the changes with the EPA, you'll know that the EPA is splitting out fumigation. So now fumigation will be its own category in many states. I think Minnesota will have fumigation as part of one of their categories, but for most states, is my understanding right now, and again, I'm recording here in July of 2024, that most states are going to have a separate category for the fumigation of vertebrate pests. So that is going to be a major change, because right now, like we have in Montana, for example, we have the agricultural vertebrate category, and fumigation is underneath that. But that's going to change in about a year or so. I don't have the exact dates. It's going to be, I think, and then people are going to have to get a separate category if they want to use fumigation. But nevertheless, if you're looking to use fumigation, particularly things like aluminum phosphide, you're going to need to get a fumigation management plan. And so what you'll notice, let me just pull up the PDF of it here. So the fumigation management plan is a requirement of aluminum phosphide. Now, those of you that are not familiar with aluminum phosphide is a sort of a gray pellet or tablet, depending which size you get. And they've been often used to fumigate grain bins to control insects inside grain bins. That's its primary agricultural use. But it's also can be used in control of insects in terms of structures. There's even some structural fumigation with it. But it also has a field rodenticide use where you are fumigating burrows, the rodents of burrowing animals, things like prairie dogs, ground squirrels, pocket gophers. I don't believe it's allowed for voles. Wouldn't necessarily recommend it for voles anyways, but those are probably the big three: ground squirrels, prairie dogs, and pocket gophers. And if you're going to be using aluminum phosphide, you are required to create a written fumigation management plan prior to application. Now, if you're reading the hand manual, so when you're looking at aluminum phosphide, you're probably getting more information than you wanted to know, but let's kind of list it down. You have to read the label, of course. You also have to read the SDS sheet, and you have to read the 40-page applicator manual. And so, yeah, it's a lot of reading before you even kill anything, right? So you're looking at about an hour and a half. Yeah, I timed myself just to read all three of those documents. Then you have to create your fumigation management plan. Well, if you read the application handbook, it'll tell you to create a fumigation management plan. The problem is it's not readily easy to create this, right? So what I did was how do we make this simpler for applicators, because it's a pain. All right, let me be blunt with you. It's a pain. So what I wanted to do is I said, how can I make this process? I can't get rid of the process, right? Because it's on the label. I'm not king for a day. Don't shoot the messenger here, right? It's not my fault. But I'm saying, because the label requires this, how do I make this process easier for people who need to use it? And what I did was I created this particular document that walks you through the process. Now, it's designed for ground squirrels and also pocket gophers. There is another additional step that has to be done for prairie dogs that's not on here. But nevertheless, it gives you, 97% of the way for prairie dogs. And it walks you through it. I had it reviewed by manufacturers. I also had it reviewed by other people who know a lot more about fumigation than I do. And basically this is the publication. And so you basically just answer the questions. You fill it out. It's kind of a template for that. Here's where you can put in you have to map out your area, right? Or you can do a cut and paste. So I have this in a PDF form. Okay, and there's even, appendices for when you have to do some testing of the atmosphere to see what levels of phosphine gas are out there and that sort of thing. So this helps walk you through that to make it less painful, right? I can't eliminate it, but it's less painful. But if you are looking to do this yourself, I have this document both in a PDF version, but I also have it in a Microsoft Word version, right? So you click here, watch it not work. Oh, here we go. There we go. Maybe that'll do it. So you can see it downloaded here, and I'm pulling it up. If you do a fair amount of fumigation work, right, you could actually have, for your business, or you're just doing this for yourself, maybe you have a particular field that you want to always treat or whatever, you can have this all done in Microsoft Word and basically just save a new copy for each new year you're going to be creating one, right? So this is something that can be very helpful. It's a Word file. You just simply download it, and then you can simply type in things. If you're a business owner, put in your logo up here or whatever. There's no copyright to it, right? What I'm saying is you can make this your own. You can't say it's, that you created it, because you didn't, right? But you can make it your own and use it without having to pay us anything. But it's a tool. If you have comments, if you think that something needs to be improved with it, reach out to me, right? You can reach out. Don't reach out to me with Wildlife Control Consultant, because I tell you to reach out to me here, okay? Reach out to me there. But again, I'm not speaking here on behalf of the Montana Department of Ag. I'm making sure I get that out. I'm just making you aware of this document so that you can be compliant with the label if you're going to be using aluminum phosphide to control vertebrate pests. But so I have this document both in a PDF and in Microsoft Word. Download them both. Download one. Doesn't matter. It's there for you should you choose to use it. There is one more publication. You can see more here. I have Richardson ground squirrels, information on Colombian ground squirrels, pocket gopher control, controlling mice in and around structures. There's some great information in there. Also have some information on how to use bait stations in an agricultural setting and in a residential setting. That may be useful for those of you involved in using rodenticides in those two particular areas. I have one publication for both of those locations. Even talk about organic vertebrate control. Yeah, it seems like a contradiction in terms, right? But we even looked at the rules governing the control of vertebrate pests in organic farming. And so this can be a guide that can be helpful. Of course, things may be different from state to state, but at least it gets you started into exploring this if you wanted to work with someone. If they said, hey, I got an organic farm, I need some vertebrate control. Can you help me? And you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. That can be a document that could be useful for you in terms of what options that you may find available. But this particular publication here, and I'll close with this one. This one talks about the registered field pesticides for vertebrates in Montana. You say, well, I'm in a different state. Totally understand that. But what this particular publication does is that it lists, let me kind of zoom in a little bit here. What it does is it delves into the various types of pesticides that are labeled for the various vertebrate animals. And I start with pack rats. And what I do here is I list them by their name and I categorize them. Is it an anticoagulant? Is it a non-anticoagulant? Is it a general use product? Is it a restricted use product? And then tell you, is it a first generation or is it a second generation? And this is something that, again, gets revised periodically. Here you can see it at the top. Straight away, it'll tell you May 2024. And I have to update it again because it was a new product that came onto the market that I need to add in. But I also try to give some information about the sites that you can apply these products on. It's not comprehensive, it's not complete, because it can be overwhelming for people to say, well, what product is going to work for voles? What product is going to work for prairie dogs? Can I buy a product that will work on prairie dogs and pocket gophers so I don't have to have multiple products that I have to purchase? And this is one way to help you navigate that. It's sort of think of it as a key or a thumbnail sketch to get you introduced into the world of rodenticides, to help you get started to know where you can look at the label more deeply and more carefully to see if it truly applies to your particular situation. And just to let you know, when you're using a vertebrate pesticide, you have to have 3 things on the label, right? You have to have the pest on the label, you have to have the site on the label, and you have to have the method of control on the label. If it's missing any of those 3 things, you can't use it. For example, if you want to do broadcast baiting for prairie dogs, there are no products that you can do that with. Right? So I can tell you that straight away. There are no products that allow you to broadcast bait for prairie dogs. Doesn't exist, right? None of the labels allow that. So you can know straight away that method is not going to be available to you. So you can say, well, why can I broadcast for voles? It's different, right? So these are some of the quirks that happen in regulation. Why is this product, one product general use, another product restricted use, and may be counterintuitive? Well, part of the reason is sometimes one requires a mechanical device to use and the other one doesn't. So it's a matter of quantity that you're applying. So things can get kind of quirky with pesticides, but nevertheless, you have to have all 3 elements to use it in the way that you want. So this is why I beg people, read the label before you purchase the product. Okay, don't simply rely on the salesman. They're not always accurate. Or people aren't always hearing things accurately. I don't know which, but something's going amiss. So I have some abbreviations here. And so let's take a quick look. So you have bushy-tailed wood rats, right? So you even have coyotes, because there are pesticides for coyotes and foxes. But let's look at something to deal with. Let's get down into deer mice, right? What's registered for deer mice and white-footed mice? Well, you can see how I've organized this. So we have non-anticoagulant baits, right? Zinc phosphide and bromethylene. That's a non-anticoagulant. And I give you some listings here. And then anticoagulant baits, and I talk about whether it's a GUP or all these products here are listed are going to be GUP, but notice I tell you whether it's a first generation anticoagulant rodenticide or a second generation SGAR versus an FGAR. And notice they all have the 100-foot restriction. And this one's going to be in development, of course, as I've listed there, because that area is still growing. Areas of pocket gophers, right? Again, I start off with the ones that are general use anticoagulant, And then I get down into the restricted use, RUP. These are first generation anticoagulants, and these are restricted: kaput, ramipril, Rosol. And they're restricted use because they're part of you have to use them in a mechanical burrow builder. Okay. And I talk about those that are going to be hand products, right? So here we have strychnine available for this. So basically you have zinc phosphide, strychnine, and then your anticoagulants. Those are your three main options. And then there's also fumigants that are available as well. There's your zinc phosphide products. And then I have the burrow fumigants. And here I just direct you. So it can be very helpful if you're looking for a quick guide to say, hey, what could be available? And then you can do a deeper dive. Because otherwise it's overwhelming for people to get started, because a lot of times the names sound familiar, and, labels matter, and they think, well, it looks like a lot of repetitive information, and it is. But if you look carefully, you'll see that two different labels on the same creature, even with the same active ingredient, sometimes they'll have different wording that allow you to do different things. And this is where it can be important. This document can help you with that particular product. So just a reminder again, just go to if you're looking for resources that don't cost you anything additional, go to it. On various vertebrate pests, you can go to the Montana Department of Ag website. Just look up Vertebrate Pest, or you can just put in the phrase Vertebrate Pest Bulletins of Montana, and you can see the publication here. All of these are available for download. There's no credit card required, anything like that. Just go ahead and download them. There's also references to some of my earlier work. These were things that I did when I was at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Here we have a whole publication dedicated to removing skunk odor that can be very helpful. Also rodent-proof construction, selective bird feeding. This is something I think a lot of people in wildlife control need to be more familiar with. Let me just pull that publication up. It's how to modify your bird feeders so that you're not you're not creating more of a pest problem, but you're attracting the birds that you actually want to help. Very important. There's a lot of simple strategies that can be done. I know people think it's impossible to keep squirrels off your bird feeders. It's simply not true. It is very possible. It's just a matter of whether people are willing to put the work in. And there, frankly, isn't much work to do it, and it can really save people a lot of time and also save them a lot of headache in having to do pest control when it comes to rodents, utilizing that bird feeder for various things. So a lot of information here, again, at no particular cost, additional cost, I should say, to you, and hope you take advantage of it. If you find it useful, great. If not, well, then you didn't put a lot of money into it in the first place. Well, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife. Again, what is Living the Wildlife? We are a site that focuses on, we're a podcast that focuses on research-based information to help professionals and newbies alike to responsibly resolve conflicts with vertebrate pests. So hope you found this information helpful, and we do hope you would simply make it a part of your favorites. You should have utilize the internet tool and make it easy for you to find this stuff. Make sure you have your folders in your web browser, and that way you're not having to always search for it. But these are going to be sources of information that are going to be reliable for yourself, that you're not wondering, is this just someone trying to sell me something? We're not trying to sell you something there with that particular website. I am trying to sell you something with my website, to be sure, but the Montana Department of Ag's not trying to sell you something there, okay? So download it at will, and hope you find it helpful. If you have comments, criticisms, love to hear from you. Again, if you have ideas for future shows, I do hope you would reach out to me again at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear you. If you have like to be on the show, definitely reach out to me as well. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel. We publish about once a week, and we've been doing this for probably 4 years, I think, at this point. Have to check my notes to see if it might be into 5 at this point. But hope you've had a great day. Again, this is Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.